develop. Which brings me to our two guests for this evening, Nina Jackson and excuse me, and Lorraine Petersen. I'll start with Lorraine. Lorraine is somebody that I know in an online world, and all I pick up from the people who know Lorraine is just how much she knows her stuff. What a lovely lady she is, but also how much she knows her stuff around SEND, around the whole area of special needs and well-being as well, which brings us also then into Nina, who is, from an independent thinking point of view, our guru when it comes to so many things, SEND, which was sort of where her teaching career started in many ways, but also increasingly around the area of well-being, and where well-being overlaps with special needs, and increasingly well-being for staff and for parents as well. So that's the introductions done. I'll start with a question for Lorraine. Can you give me, Lorraine, just from the stuff that's been going on at the moment, can you give me examples of schools and organisations and institutions that have really got it right when it has come to supporting children with special educational needs, with alternative needs through this current crisis? Some good examples.
Yeah, I think there's plenty out there, and I think the biggest group, I'm not going to name names, but the ones that have really got it right are the ones that have kept in touch with their children throughout the whole time that the children haven't been in. When we first went into lockdown, there was this big issue around all vulnerable children should be in schools. And then we had the big conversation about what does vulnerable mean. The government thought it was everybody that had got an education, health and care plan. However, there was an awful lot of children who have got education, health and care plans who actually were not going to be safe at school because they had significant medical needs and so therefore needed to be isolated at home. But those schools that have really done a good job are those that have kept in constant touch with families, constant touch with the individuals at home, not to the point where they're nagging them and finding out, have you done this piece of work, have you done that, but actually just to find out if they are safe and well, and are they getting some fresh air, are they actually having some physical activity. My concern is that across the country that hasn't happened everywhere. And so therefore there will be some very, very vulnerable youngsters, both from an SEN and a mental health point of view, that have just not had that drop in on a regular basis from school. Or if they have, it's been very much about you didn't finish your maths yesterday, or you didn't get 10 out of 10 in that particular exercise. And I think that the mental health and well-being of all our students, whether they're nursery right the way through to GCSE and A-level, that mental health and well-being and that catching up and checking that everybody's happy and well and safe is the thing that has kept the system going, really, and it's kept teachers with something to do, I suppose. It's meant they've kept in touch. So we've had loads of Zoom meetings and team meetings, and where staff, and they've had I know at the special school where I'm a governor, the staff for one class often have a Zoom meeting with the families, and it really helps the staff as well, because they're feeling rather jaded in the sense that they're doing lots of things and they're working really hard, but they're not actually interacting with children, which is what everybody went into the profession to do.
But let me just bring this light in just a little bit more. I've lost my track. I lost my train of thought. What I was going to say then. What would you say were the specific challenges with children with these with special needs? We've all been challenged. We've all had to learn new things. We've all had to deal with waking up in the middle of the night and a hard sweat, and so much for all of us. What is specifically makes it even harder if you've got a child with special needs or the family with special needs?
Okay, well, I think first of all, it's whether they can access any of the online learning or home learning that has been put out there. Those really good schools have been really good at making sure that the work's been differentiated and is accessible to all. But I also think the challenge is also with families, because it's hard work having a child that's got special needs. And, you know, if they're not skilled in supporting those youngsters educationally, they're obviously very skilled parentally, but they may not be skilled in the sort of education side. And, you know, those youngsters that are on the SEN support register in our mainstream schools, or those children that have got education, health and care plans, when they are in school, they are getting something that is additional and or different to all the other children. And obviously that is a bigger challenge. And again, there are schools that have used their teaching assistants to do one-to-one support through Zoom or Teams. But there are other children that won't have had any of that additional help, if you like, through the whole of the time that we've been in lockdown. And so I think the challenge when they come back, if that's the sort of, is that, you know, these children will all be at different stages depending on what support they've had while they have been at home. The other issue, of course, is that many of those youngsters also will have had support when they've been in school from other services, so speech and language therapy, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and some of that has been going on, some of that has been doing, you know, some remotely, but it's very difficult to do physiotherapy, you know, remotely if you need to touch somebody and actually do exercise with them. So that there's lots of things that have gone on that's been really good. The thing that I think has happened, and I think when these youngsters come back to school, is that they will have much, much better social skills and life skills. Because if you look at Twitter, you know, the number of children who can now bake a cake or cook a meal or make their bed or help tidy up, it's just phenomenal. You know, and so I do think that there's been a lot of learning going on. I'm just not sure that it's equal to the learning that would have gone on in school. That's
Right.
not to say it's not good learning.
Yeah. Well, it's back to what we value and what's valued, what's measured, and all the other sort of wider debates, really. So to you, Nina, really, what would you say, based on your experience? And I know so many people connect with you, Nina, through various social media, under the radar, offering you, asking you for support and help and advice. What are you picking up from a special needs point of view, but then also from a well-being point of view for the children that are the specific challenges caused by this current crisis?
So before I answer that, Ian, I would just really like to extend my thanks to so many of you teachers and leaders and parents who have really, really come together at this very, very difficult time, this global pandemic, to not just put your children first, but the community first as well, and to best serve them the way that you can through social and emotional support and looking at learning in a very, very different way. So I've had a number of things really from parents and schools who've reached out, and a number of people who want to celebrate the great things that have actually been happening at home. And I'm going to change the language here slightly from send to, as you know, I prefer to use the language of learning and living differences, which ties in brilliantly with so many of the things that have been happening at home. For example, a number of parents have been in touch with me to say, you know, I've got a child who's ASC, and there are a number of issues often in school with routines, with social anxiety, and whatever is particular to their needs wherever they actually are on the spectrum and with the condition. But having these routines and opportunities to tap in greater at home to find out what their strengths are in relation to what their magic is. Okay, so for example, you may have one child who has a particular magic with visualizing and seeing the world through sounds and smells and things like that, but then being able to create and produce things at home that represent what learning is for them. So in many ways, what's happened is for some families and for some individuals, we've actually seen great learning going on because they're in a far more comfortable environment. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that what's happening in school isn't necessarily comfortable, or that the work that the teachers and the support assistants, TAs, leaders, etc., doing for these children in relation to the EHCPs or SEMH, or regardless whatever their needs are, but they've almost been given this freedom to find their inner magic and to express it in a very, very different way. Some of you will have seen, obviously, the celebration of photographs. You know, look what my child has done today, the way that they've created this. They've laid on the floor and they've drawn the human body. And it's in many ways allowing a freedom of expression that they might not always have in a classroom situation. So we've got this adventure, I guess, which is supporting some of our students with learning and living differences. And then on the other side then, the real tragedy, and it absolutely breaks my heart. We've got teachers in schools creating some really amazing online learning. But we've got children, whether they're in poverty or whether because they can't access the learning due to their learning and living differences, because parents are not fully aware of the accessibility with technology tools, who are not able to access this great learning resource that's actually being prepared for them. I wish in many ways that a real part of the curriculum and training for teachers would be to show teachers with parents what happens in school with technology and how the basics can be actually put in place at home. Many of the children will know about the way that technology can enhance their learning, and they'll use video and they'll use text and they'll use speech to text or whatever. The parents may not necessarily understand that there are hidden accessibility tools within these devices that can actually enhance the learning. And to be fair, how can some of them even access some of these devices if A, they don't have a router, they don't have a Wi-Fi, they don't even have a laptop? And the dreadful situation I saw last week of one family where they had one smartphone to share between 6 children and the parents. Now, if this is what the government or the system is asking parents to do, this is nonsense. Which is where we need to go back to thinking about, first and foremost, we've got to keep all of our SEND children, all of our learning and living differences safe. We need to give them security both in home and online. And those who've had the amazing opportunity to go into school, and thank you to those of you who've been on the front line and are key workers and been working with those with physical disabilities in AP schools and all of those things. Please do not underestimate your brilliance and what you've done for these young people and for the parents too. But what we need to start doing in the wider sense is, where there have been celebratory moments of the freedom of expression, then what about those who have the ability or have the enthusiasm and the need to want to do schooling on learning, but because of issues with technology in the system, they've not had the accessible tools? I'm hoping that what this has done, this has really given a big red flag to, I'm going to try and choose my words very carefully here, because I almost had the word numpties that came to mind there, but maybe I shouldn't say it out loud. I'll say it very quietly. Those in government who really don't understand what the full needs of our learning and living differences are. But they understand that there is a need for a wider, a broader curriculum which has survival, belonging, hope and a purpose at its heart. And earlier on today, just before this session in the leadership, Julie Rees and Dave Whitaker and Andy were talking about the recovery curriculum. And alongside that, I think what we need to start thinking about is, what can we take from what has happened at home, the celebrations and the difficulties, and interweave them very, very carefully back into whatever the system is going to be. And I think I've sort of spoken enough there at that point, really, because I could go on forever.
One little question, and you both give me 10 answers to the questions that I was thinking of ahead. So yeah,
it's our special brains. It's our special brains.
I'm going to go and watch The Rose Garden while you talk. No, it's brilliant. It's really, there's so much there. Numbers as well. Nina, I think this is really interesting, that one of the things you're saying is what we've got is an opportunity for children with living and learning differences to be able to show their talents. And I'll come back to your words, or your granddad's word, Tadke's word, stamp, in just a minute, but to show these talents and have all the benefits in terms of their self-esteem and their self-worth as it goes on Twitter, on Facebook, or whatever it might be, in a way that they might not get in an English education system, which is more about channeling people and then just getting rid of the ones who don't sort of quite fit the channel. And I think that's huge. I think it's a real possibility, and it has implications for when children go back who have had the opportunity to look at what I can do. This is my special. This is what makes me special. This is my gift. This is my stamp. And then is that going to be forgotten about when they go back in or not? But let's just come back to Nina, and then I'll take it back to Lorraine. But Nina, tell us about Tadke's stamp.
So my Tadke was, I mean, every grandfather is amazing, but a Welsh Tadke, I have to say, is far more special than anything. And my Tadke was a great philosopher, severely poverty stricken, and worked in the mines, left school at a very young age. In fact, left school at 10, and because school wasn't right for him in that sense. And he started to learn from the community, from the people, in fact, all the coal miners that came to my living room here because it was a cobbler's shop, and they would come to have their shoes made and created, and they would use phrases from the Bible, and they would talk about philosophy, and they would create poetry amongst themselves. And my Tadke would listen, and he would tap into some of the poetic melodic sounds that they would use, and learned the language and the harmony of communication from coal miners to build on a philosophical understanding of the world. Tadke said to me when I was a number of years ago, and when I was writing Teaching, Learning and Sherbet Lemons, he said, "You see, Nina, the thing is, okay, everybody has an invisible stamp. Everybody is born with a special stamp. And what our job is as educators, practitioners, parents, is to slowly unveil that invisible stamp, which is a special stamp." And he said to me, "You're a musician, Nina, you're a teacher now. So obviously, that was part of your invisible stamp," and mentioned other people, relatives in the family somebody became a nurse, that was their special thing. And I think now is the time for us to look at ways that we can unveil the invisible stamps, the magical stamps, each and every child who has learning and living differences can flourish. And we had a conversation recently with the amazing Graham Martin Brown, and we talked about, along with Martin Illingworth and Forget School, how can we offer, I wouldn't call it an alternative platform, how can we offer like a dual carriageway system in our education sphere, so that we can allow our magical children, and some of them have hidden magic because we don't quite know how to get in there. How are we going to give them this dual carriageway opportunity to allow them to flourish and to have hope and recognise their own skills and strengths? Okay. You give a child an iPad and you show them in accessibility, somebody who's got dyslexia, dysgraphia, dysphagia, etc., what tools there are in accessibility, that they can change speech to text, or that they can activate something on the iPad, to then be able to show a teacher very quickly, this is my thought process, this is my thinking, be it asking me to write it with a pen, No, because by the time I've put the pen in my hand and I've put it down on paper, I've lost my train of thought. I mean, I get that quite frequently. But as soon as you show magic in something else, it can actually unveil magic in children. So we need to show them the way, and we need to be brave, like
Okay.
Dave Harris was talking this morning. So I want us to think about that dual carriageway, most definitely. And those of you who are watching, think about it, please.
Dual carriageway. Lorraine, what Nina's very much describing is the opposite of a deficit model when it comes to living and learning differences as opposed to special needs. I feel, I've not got a special needs background at all, as you can probably tell, that the perception, if you don't have that background, is one of deficit. It's what these children can't do, and they need support to be able to do, which is what Nina's trying to say, is we need to find what they can do. How does that resonate with your practice, Lorraine, and how common do you think that is across schools generally, not just within special needs, that they see it not as a deficit model, as the opposite?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still an awful lot of schools that do see it as a deficit model. And to be fair, the training for teachers is still very like that. You know, if we don't celebrate inclusivity enough, especially in our mainstream schools, and listening to Nina talk, you know, that magic, if you go into a good special school, that's when you see that magic, because they are bringing out that individuality and that personalized nature for every single one of their children. And for me, I think, you know, our mainstream schools can learn a lot from some of our special schools in terms of that individuality and that magic and that stamp and, you know, all of those fabulous words that Nina has used. But the problem, the issue, and, you know, I hope that over these last few weeks, we've started to just think a bit beyond, you know, the national curriculum and Ofsted and exams and tests. And, you know, we haven't done any exams this year. We've done no SATs, no, you know, whatever. The world has not fell apart. And I just think we need to think, what are we doing to some of these youngsters by sort of forcing them, you know, down that path, as opposed to the dual carriageway that Nina was talking about. And I think that having that, you know, that two-path process would be really easy to do. And it isn't about having an alternative curriculum or an alternative provision. It's just about thinking about, you know, for some of our youngsters, that pathway is not the right one. So we need to develop, you know, another one. And one of the things that I have talked a lot about in the last few weeks is that I think there will be a significant number of children and young people who will not want to go back to school, not because they don't like school, but because they have found learning at home far more within, you know, for them has been a really good thing. The fact that maybe they don't start till 10 o'clock in the morning, or they can work till 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock at night. And I know that, you know, when I did a blog for you at the beginning, I talked about, you know, we've got to get away from this, you know, every child's got to be on a chair in front of a teacher every lesson to actually be learning, because, you know, for some youngsters, they'll be on that chair, but they're not learning. But actually they could be at home and virtually, or being in that lesson, but not, say, sitting in it, but, you know, on a laptop somewhere. And that's a much, much better way for them to learn. And my hope is that one of the things that I hope will come out of all of this is that we start to understand, you know, just how our young people learn. And start to develop those different ways. And I'm not talking about, you know, sort of visual learners and kinesthetic. I'm actually talking about using that technology, using the flexibility of the day. So, you know, if they're not feeling up to it at 9 o'clock in the morning, they can have some time to do some mindfulness, or, you know, to do some physical activity, and then prepare themselves ready then to be ready to learn. And so I think one of the issues we're going to have going forward is, how do we get some of those youngsters back into school, especially some of those that were on the cusp, if you like, of being school phobic when all this happened. And we had an awful lot of youngsters who were really struggling with their social, emotional and mental health and not being able to go into school, or were on part-time timetables which are illegal, or we're only doing 2 days a week, whatever. And I think those youngsters will probably have found their niche in terms of how they learn, and that I think is going to be one of our challenges as we go forward, but it could also be a real opportunity.
So what would be your advice to head teachers where they've got children who don't want to come back? What should they be saying to the parents, to the children, to the staff?
Well, I mean, first of all, can I just say what sort of thanks as Nina did, because I think head teachers have done an absolutely stunning job. I as part of some of the work that I do, I have been following every piece of guidance that has come out of the DFE and sort of extrapolating the information for a group of heads that I've been doing some work for, and it's just ridiculous, the amount of guidance that head teachers have been given, and yet at the bottom line is the head teachers make the final decision. And I think that what this has shown is that our head teachers are some of the best in the world, and we can trust them, and they do know their schools, they do know their teachers, they do know their children, they do know their families. And I think this now gives them an opportunity to actually say, this group of students, and it might only be 1 or 2 in a mainstream school, are just not fitting in to the norm, whatever that might look like. We need to develop systems that work for those children and those families. And it might be that, they don't stop at home, but they're in a separate room, but with their iPad or their laptop, and they're engaged in a lesson, but they're not in that room with 30 other youngsters where they really find that quite difficult. And I think that where the schools have been making those contacts with parents, those relationships have really grown. And again, we can't lose that, because our parents are their first educators. They're the ones that know their children the best. And yet they're the last people we talk to or ask for support from. And I hope that bit. So from a head teacher's point of view, I would say carry on working with your families in the way you have been doing during this pandemic. Don't stop, and let's build the education system that those individuals need, doing it in co-production with staff, but also parents and external providers of services and therapies that we might need as well.
I love the idea of the flexibility, and we've got a conversation, it's more of a meeting Wednesday. We call School Differently, and it's from a lady who has set up a campaign group to fight against her daughter was a school refuser, and she's sort of challenging the government legally on a number of things, and how many children are refusing, how many more might be refusing going forward, and how many children are just not going to go back. And what we're saying there is, okay, here's the system, and many children will fit in the system, and it's fine, it's okay, and fair enough. But maybe there's a framework around that which will allow those who don't fit the system to be able to have an education where their stamp is discovered, where their skills are built, where their self-esteem is built, is created. And I think the idea of having it's very striking. Here's the classroom, and over here is another room. It's not about extra this or the baby. My daughter was dyslexic at school, and every time she had to leave the mainstream school to primary school and go, walk the walk of shame to go to the baby lessons because she was getting it. It was just awful. It did her self-esteem a great deal of harm. But this is a different way of doing it. This is an alternative way of doing it, and I just think there's so much potential there. There's a question which has come through with regard to about making the connections with the parents. So somebody's asking that how can we support families without constantly phoning or zooming them? They said without sort of. So some children have been really unsettled, demotivated, saddened by seeing their teachers and peers via Zoom. How can we support them without it constantly being phoning and zooming? I know some people have done the thing where they've driven around and sort of been on the doorstep. And what sort of instances of connection beyond phoning and zoom have you come across? And I'll come back to Nina with that as well.
Okay. Well, the one that I've heard quite a lot of is schools that have been sending postcards. So just to, through the post, because we don't get a lot through the post nowadays, and just to say, hope you're okay. And then the children have sent postcards back to their teachers showing the things that they've been doing. I think the photographs that are put on social media or on school websites of the children actually doing things has been a really good way of keeping in touch. And I agree, you know, there is, using Zoom and Teams can have a real positive, but it could also have that negative impact as well. And I think that, again, if you know your children and families well, then you know what works for, you know, for those families. And for some, I've heard that, you know, the teacher contacts once a week, and that's as much about catching up with the child and what the child's been doing. Actually, for the parents, it's also you know, 15 minutes for them to just let off steam, if you like, about, you know, the things that they've been finding difficult as well. But as you say, you know, some staff have been driving around and having sort of social distancing conversations over across the front garden. I think it is very much about what works for your children and you know, your situation. And I think there are challenges, you know, children that live in sort of high-rise flats who can't get out into the sort of fresh air, or there's no open space for them to go to, and that's more difficult for you to go and visit them. And I think, you know, for those, it's about how can we provide physical activity that they can do inside their flat or apartment or whatever. And again, it's that personalising both the message and the activity to make sure that, you know, not only is everybody safe and well, but they are accessing something, but then leaving alone when you know that you've probably gone over the top and it's all just gone a bit, you know, help.
Nina, any examples of creativity and connection that you've come across?
I will answer that in just a second, but the person who asked that question, I think there's a two-strand approach here, because it's quite clear from that. It's saying that, you know, what do we do about children who are being really unsettled, demotivated and saddened by seeing teachers and peers via Zoom? First of all, that's about adjusting to lockdown and isolation, and that can be really, really challenging for so many of our learners with learning and living differences, because you don't have that human connection, you don't have that contact, and for some can't fully understand this need to either have to connect via screen because they're there but you can't touch them or you can't actually be with them. And then about the aspect of how do we support the families without constantly phoning or Zooming. I think what we need to do is we actually need to build some resilience amongst families, and to the point where if that's a problem, in that the children are becoming really unsettled and very upset by seeing their teachers and seeing their friends, then for that, choose that one phone call slot during that week and say to the parents, okay, try it for a week where you're not part of the online Zoom, that you see the teachers and you see the peers, and can you collect for us some really interesting things that you will have done as a family? Because people will become very, very hurt and very sad if you can't have this human connection. But make the family human connection. Even if you're a one-parent family with a child, make that connection the primary human connection to be able to develop the importance of relationships, language, sharing of, I know, a celebratory moments, difficult moments, and then give that parent and that child the opportunity to say, I've missed you all, but this is what we did when we were apart from you, so that they start having that space and adjusting to being away from family and friends. Creative ways. I know that on walks and on pathways on streets and things, that some teachers have actually left notes and have left little boxes of magical things to do, okay, outside children's houses. We see in America this big thing of people driving past in cars. I know of teachers who've actually left almost sort of like boxes of wonder, ideas, things, just to allow the children to think about what can they do with this to then be able to share at a future time with the school or with their peers. And let's not kid ourselves. I don't think there is one set answer, because in the diverse needs of our learners, of human beings, we can only currently, as ourselves, do the best that we can, or think that we can be the best that we can be. So go with your gut instinct, think about different ways that may be able to hook people in, and primarily develop this friendship and support network with the parents, so that they actually develop these close relationships with students, so that they can then report back at a later time. Give them space.
Okay, thank you. Somebody mentioned teaching assistants. What I hadn't thought in all of the conversations this week about the role of the teaching. So I'm never quite sure how many are left in UK schools at the moment. What advice would you give teachers in terms of using their teaching assistants, and what advice would you give to teaching assistants for now and for the immediate going back? Lorraine, let's go with you first.
Okay. Well, there are still quite a lot of teaching assistants in English schools. Many of them are there to support children who've got additional needs, and to be fair, many of them have come to grips with technology in a way that maybe they wouldn't have had before the lockdown, and so have been doing one-to-one support or small group support, or trying to carry on with interventions. They are some of the ones that have been doing some of the phone calls and the one-to-one support for a child, if that's the child that they would, do one-to-one support for in school. An awful lot of them, and I've had loads of people asking me about this, have been catching up on their own professional development, and so looking at sort of specific things on autism or dyslexia that they wouldn't have time to do when schools are open, and making resources. They've been doing lots and lots of work, sort of planning for when we go back, and resources that we might need when we do go back. I think when schools do start to open, I think for me, one of the challenges is going to be, and Nina sort of alluded to this, especially with the very young children, is that friendship, and that needs to be part of those friendship groups, and yet we're still going to have to social distance. And if you've seen some of the classrooms that have put squares on the floor, and these 4-year-olds got to sit in this square and can't move from that square, and I think that both teachers and support staff are going to have to do an awful lot of that friendship, and trying to find ways of bringing those children together without them being together, if that makes sense. Because they've been without those friendships for a long time, so we've got to sort of get that back. But at the same time, they can't hold hands, they can't hug each other, they can't, they've got to stay at social distance. So I think that support staff are going to be key in that, if you like, supporting with that, bringing those friendships together, and just being there when some of these youngsters are really struggling, because they can't do what they want to do.
The friendship one is interesting. I was speaking to a Senko from a Rotherham school, primary school, a few days ago, and she was talking that some of her children are saying, I haven't seen my friends, therefore I don't know if I've got any friends. And I said, well, write a blog. It's like object permanence and friendship. If it's not in front of me, then maybe it doesn't exist. And it was really worrying, as it would any of us. We need friendship, we need belonging and connection. So I can see how any way of getting children to reconnect in a friendly way in the current situation with the distancing has got to be so critical, so key. Julie Rees, who's a primary head teacher, has talked about introducing namaste to her children. So that's how they greet every morning, which, and I think schools in Nepal, and it's a lovely way to start the day, the namaste. And then they do the bubble with the arms out, and then the bubble then becomes a self hug. And we know, and the research shows, that hugging yourself has some of the similar benefits, neurologically speaking, in terms of the neurochemicals from getting a hug from somebody that you love. So helping children feel they have friends, all children, let alone children with extra difficulties, extra challenges. Nina, anything you want to add from the TA point of view? And I want to then sort of bring it back towards mental health implications.
Yeah. I think from the TA's point of view, we need to really consider about how they're going to adjust to what schooling is going to be like, how different it's going to be. Maybe even have lost colleagues, I've lost friends, I've lost some children, I don't know. But the TAs are going to be absolutely crucial in keeping the children safe and secure. And from the research and from the work that I've been doing as well, we know that when somebody has been in has experienced crisis or trauma, and I would call this really a traumatic thing for so many, that for the younger children, that we're okay with them bringing in transitional objects. Whether that be a cushy blanket or for some children it might be a special book. For example, actually for adults, transitional objects can be a mobile phone. Can you believe that? I feel safe because I've got my transitional object. And for the TAs as well, give them space. Allow your TAs as well to collect together and have space to say about how they're feeling. Involve them not in just meetings, involve them in more CPD and support than they've ever had before. And please, 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 I know so many of you do, but occasionally maybe one or two don't say thank you enough, because they are the main hook for so many of our children and young people, and teachers too. And can we please make sure that we remember that if there's going to be a theme for a lesson or whatever it is, that we tell them and we share that with them, because they are our solid anchors. And I want to say thank you to so many people who've been sharing also some great resources in that chat thread there. So what you're doing, attendees, which is sharing all of that, I want us to give opportunities to our TAs to share some of the things that they've learned and new ideas that they've got to make learning and teaching better for everybody, and that includes themselves as well.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ian, could I just say, sorry, the other thing I think that we, head teachers need to ensure is, that all our staff, but especially the TAs, feel safe in their work, and they have the PPE that they need if they're having to do personal care or working with children who maybe spit or, have got difficulties, and if they haven't got the right PPE, they're going to feel very vulnerable. And so they deserve to have the right equipment for their own health and safety as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Of course. We've got 10 minutes maximum. We could go on all day. The mental health overlap with special needs, living and learning differences. So we're aware that even before all of this kicked off, there was what some people would describe as a mental health crisis within our schools, with regard to children, but also with regard to the adults in the schools as well. We know there are so many stories, and again, Nina, I know so many people connect with you directly for help and support, because they know how much help and support you can give in that area. So the challenge is there for all of us working in education anyway, because of the pressures. And then when you throw in the special needs and there's particular challenges of individual children on top of that, how do we deal with that? Where do we go with that? Where do you start with well-being, emotional health issues, and special needs, Nina?
I think we have to start with the what I call the basics. Okay, to make every human being, every child, every teacher, every person that's linked with the school, to make them feel happy, healthy, but more than anything, that they are safe and secure. So we've got then issues of anxiety, issues of loss, issues of transition, and I want us to think about what I call the check-in, check-out approach. Funnily enough, and I talk about this a lot when I'm working in the area of mental health and well-being, and it was pertinent as part of Mark Finnis's restorative justice session with Simon this morning. But it's crucial that we check in with people, even down to the simple phrase of, "Are you okay?" Now, okay or okay-ish, I mean, it can mean many, many different things to so many people. But first of all, that check-in process, actually asking people or giving them the, are you okay? Look, depending what the need is for that specific child. Check in with them, okay? Check up with them in either maybe a few hours later or a few days later, and then eventually when things are settled, you check out. But you do that frequently in lessons at the beginning of the day, and it's interwoven into everything that we do. I mean, it's like, hang on, I'm going to check, have I got my clothes on? Oh yes, I have. Okay. Check up later. No, I haven't got my my top hasn't got stuck in the back of my skirt coming out of the toilet. That's a bit of a checkup. And later on, I've managed the day, so I'm going to check out and everything's fine. It's the same sort of system, but in a framework of emotional health and well-being. So as simple as it may be, simple is the new complex. We're often looking for these, amazing strategies and whatever these amazing strategies and tools are, because the simplest of things are the best and most amazing things. So safety, secure, then will come a bit more happiness, which will also feed into feeling a bit healthier and ready to have an adventure in the learning world with this possible dual carriageway pathway. And we all know that dual carriageways go down into a single road at some point, which encompasses everything to do with inclusion. But we have to go back. We have to go back to basic human needs. Check in, check up, check out, and then we put the complexities of mental health into place and bring in the external agencies.
Okay, all right. So the complex is the new simple. Just keep it simple.
Simple is the new complex.
The new complex.
Yeah, you're tired.
Yeah, that's the one.
Simple is the new complex.
The new complex. Lorraine, so for you then, the overlap. Where do we start with the overlap between mental health and special needs in a time of global pandemic where we're all struggling?
I personally think that when things start to open, and who knows when that's going to be or whatever, I think that there's got to be, and like Nina, simple, there's got to be a whole school approach to how we support mental health and well-being. Forget curriculum, forget whether we're going to be doing GCSEs next year. We've got to be thinking about how are we going to support mental health and well-being of our staff, of our students, of our families, and that's got to take precedent. And it's no good thinking, well, okay, we'll do that between now and summer, and then when we come back in September, it'll all be fine. Because actually, half of our school children will not have been in school between now and summer. Those youngsters will have been out for, will it be 15 weeks, 16 weeks, something like that? I mean, that's a long time. Some will have come back and their friendship groups will have been. And so I think, again, schools have got to think maybe even for the whole of the first term, so between, September and Christmas, mental health and well-being has got to be top of the agenda. Nina mentioned the recovery curriculum, and that has got to be, top, middle and bottom for everybody, because whatever has happened during the time of lockdown, somebody somewhere will have had some bereavement, some loss, not just not being able to have met their granddad or their grandma, or whatever it is, they will have been suffering in some way. And even when we, if we say, okay, in September, everything's not going to be back to normal, we're still not going to be able to meet in very large groups. We're probably still going to have to social distance at some point, And so I think that as a school, we have got to obviously continue to do what the government is telling us to do, but be supporting those, well, maybe not linear, Yeah, but we've got to be supporting that mental health and well-being, and we can only do that, in my eyes, if it's a whole school approach. So it's from the top. In terms of the SEN and the mental health, the one thing that I think is really important is that every school should have a mental health lead, and that should not be the Senko. Because the Senko has enough to do, and so the mental health lead and the Senko should be working together to actually ensure that, yes, mental health across the school is okay, and then the Senko can support the children that have got additional needs, but they should not be the same person. And I think if nothing else comes out of this, if every school, you know, has got a mental health lead who has done some training and who can then train other staff, that would be a real bonus to what we had before lockdown.
Okay, so
I think also, sorry, just to come in there, you know, in this transition period of going back to interweaving children and teachers and things back into school, I think we really need to consider the impact on parents as well. I know some of them will be, yeah, but there will be many of them who will actually be who will need a lot of emotional well-being support themselves. This is the time for us all to come together in what I call the upside down, what's that ice cream? The upside down cornetto. Yeah? Turn it upside down. We have the triangulation. It's got to come down to food, be fair. So we have the parents, the staff, and the children, students, and young people. And we really get this right, and we put humanity and kindness and friendship at the heart of everything.
And recognising that we've all got something to offer.
Oh yeah.
You know, so parents have got just as much to offer as teachers as have the pupils themselves.
Yeah. Sprinkles and all.
Sprinkles and all. Wow, thank you. That hour's gone really, really quickly. And so much, I think, hopefully the attendees agree, so much there to take away and think about and pull apart. And this, we keep coming back to kindness. And there's been, through this is the fourth conversation of today with different angles that we've looked at, but we keep coming back to values, we keep coming back to courage, we keep coming back to trust the teachers, trust the children, trust the communities, and then we keep coming back to kindness. And I think we can't go that far wrong, given all that's going on, if that is our starting point and that is our focus when we go back. And if we can hang on to those things going forward, so that in 10 years' time we can say, yeah, we really prioritise kindness in our education system as a result of what we learned during COVID. Then I think it almost will have been worthwhile.
Yeah.
Time. Almost. Okay, that's enough. So remember, people watching, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening in the Rose Garden, drinking gin and tonic and explaining yourself. Put some money in the buckets of NHS Relief Project or Winston's Wish or The Big Issue or RSPB. Keep following us at ITL Worldwide so we can keep you up to date, or just email in independentthinking.co.uk or subscribe independentthinking.co.uk or .com to our website. There's lots of blogs on there which might be relevant. The blog that Lorraine mentioned, she wrote for me, wrote for us a few weeks ago, is on there, so check that one out. And independentthinkingpress.com, there's lots of information, lots of ideas, lots of books, and any way that we can help and support the amazing work that you're doing. And I'd my thanks to Nina's and Lorraine's for all that you are doing out there at the sharp end, working with the communities. Thank you ever so much, and enjoy your evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.